Hi, today I would like to comment a topic that is been in the last month a bit hot. And it is a new regulation that the European Commission has released as draft in September 2022 called the Resilience Act. A little bit in context, what these regulations tries to address is the problem of the supply chains in open source software. Uh, in short, they try to prevent new Log4j episodes. And this is a legit objective. However, some organizations have been looking at this draft of the regulation and they have found some major concerns that I will try to summarize in 5 minutes. Some of them, some of the organizations that have been studying this are the Internet Society, the Open Forum Europe, NLNet Labs Foundation, the Eclipse Foundation, or the Python Software Foundation, amongst others. And what they have seen, well, first, these regulations wants to apply more or less a CE marking, like the seal that you can see in all the products that you can find in Europe, for hardware and software. And they want to do this doing two things mostly. First, they want all the projects to have a compliance, and depending on how critical it is, the project, it can be a self-assessed with a lot of documentation, processes, risk, whatever. But if it is a risk, if it is a critical project, it means that you need a third-party auditor to make this certification, which means a lot of documentation plus time plus money. But it also adds liability. This means who is responsible for the damage and losses that the code can cause in when, for example, another log4j. Let's see an example of this. Imagine that you make a Python library, you make it open source, you publish it, and then you forget about that. And in some years, another company used your library in its products and has some big customers. Imagine, for example, banking or health service or public administration, army, whatever. And it has a bug found in your library, and you are responsible of that to cover the cost of the damage that these companies had because of your code. Not the company that made the software, but you, because the library that you did, even if it is open source and you made it for free in your free time, caused this problem. And not only you. The thing is that anyone that contributes to your project can be also eligible for liability. And not only contributors, but the ones who also distributed this. In this case, if it is a Python library, the Python Foundation, because it can be distributed by PyP, or if it is an NPM package, can be Maven Global, or whatever. Or even GitHub, if it is a repository in GitHub. And this is a big problem, because, and in some of the blog posts that you can find the links in the description of this video, they are enumerating. The first one, for example, is that people will not want to pay for compliance and to get responsibilities of the code. And this will mean that if you make a project, even in a small project, you will have to make a lot of documentation, even pay for third-party auditors, and hire an insurance for the possible cost that it can cause in third parties. Another one is that all open source programmers in Europe, even if they want or they don't want, they will have to comply with this. Of course, if you are not in Europe, maybe people will start to say, okay, I don't want to pay for that, and I don't want to be responsible of problems in Europe. I will make clause in my project and say, okay, this project is not to be used in Europe. So you will not be able to access some projects or even some platforms. Imagine that GitHub says, I don't want to run with the cost of the projects, of the problems that the projects that I'm hosting cause in Europe. And they say, okay, I'm not available in Europe. Imagine this not only with GitHub, but with all the NPM packages, all the Python packages, foundations like Eclipse, like Apache, like CNCF. Imagine not being able to access the source code, for example, of Kubernetes or the Linux kernels or Linux distributions like Ubuntu or Fedora that are using a lot of, not only the Linux core, but a lot of different tools or packages, libraries. Imagine all of these disappear because you cannot use them in Europe because the people that use them, that makes them outside of Europe, don't want to run with the costs for that. And also companies will say, I don't want my people to contribute open source projects because if I have an employee that contributes to an open source project, I'm responsible of what he is doing and for the whole project liability. So companies will stop contributing to the open source. So here, my 2 cents, and I want to explain this in the last 2 minutes. First, read all the documentation that you can find. There is some blog post that I'm posting here in the description of this video. Also, there is a great panel in the last FOSDEM that I'm putting also here. Spread the word, try to involve your policymakers. However, I think this regulation is trying to solve a capitalist problem with bureaucracy, but without trying to change the problem. The issue here is that big companies are earning money and saving a lot of money thanks to the open source libraries that they are using. But when they cause problems, they don't want to assume the responsibility of that. And this regulation, instead of pushing the responsibility to the companies and saying, hey, if you want a library to be secure, to be performant, to be without risk, contribute to this, support the people that are writing that and maintaining that. Instead of this, you are pushing the responsibility to the individual contributors and the open source organization. That it is not fair. So my ideas is why don't we force, for example, a build of materials for open source packages of commercial software. This way we can tax the companies making software using open source, and we can distribute these taxes among the open source projects and the open source organizations. Also, we can enforce, for example, that these companies that are using open source, and we know this by the build of materials that they publish, and they are enforced to publish, to dedicate a percentage of their time to maintain those libraries. We can enforce that. I mean, we are doing that already. It is like the bill of materials, if you have not heard of it, it is kind of the list of ingredients of the food that we buy. When you buy a canned meat, for example, or a bottle of milk, you can see the list of ingredients. The bill of materials is similar in the software. You can see all the list of libraries that this software is using. Why don't we enforce projects and companies that receive public subventions to make software, to make them open source? This will be a great contribution to the open source. Also, the public sector is a major customer of of software. Why don't we enforce the public sector to use open source solutions when available? And last, if we think as Europe or as country or society that there are some libraries or pieces of software that are critical, why don't we make projects to maintain them? Why don't we involve the public sector, public employments to work on them and maintain them if they are that critical? This problem will be solved when the 3-4 maintainers of Log4j don't have to maintain the project in their free time. Unless we find a solution to change that problem, we will not solve the problem at all. We will just push the problem to other people. And mostly what we are doing here is pushing the problem not to the ones that are earning money, but the ones who are doing this for free. And open source organizations and foundations. Well, this is a changing topic, and we will track this and follow this up. And I hope we can see some good news in the next months, because else I think we are going to a bad scenario for not only the Europe open source community, but the whole open source scenario.